"Is Trump your father or husband?" The words landed like a grenade. The chamber froze. Reporters jolted upright in their seats, pens stalled mid-scribble. Cameras clicked in frantic bursts, the sound ricocheting off the marble walls like gunfire. A gasp swept through the crowd, followed by low, uneasy murmurs. It wasn't the kind of question anyone expected in a room choreographed for political theater. It was too raw, too sharp, too unfiltered. And yet, it was exactly the kind of truth people had been waiting to hear. Ivanka Trump blinked, her polished composure wavering for just a heartbeat. Her lips parted as if to respond, but nothing came. For years she had been untouchable, the carefully packaged face of dynasty. Privilege wrapped in silk and branded as empowerment. But in that moment, the mask cracked. Across from her, Jasmine Crockett stood unwavering, her eyes locked on Ivanka with a mix of fire and calm restraint. There was no smirk, no shout, no theatrics, just a surgical strike of words that cut through generations of inherited arrogance. It wasn't a cheap shot. It wasn't gossip. When power is passed down like heirlooms, where does identity end and corruption begin? The audience knew it. The cameras knew it. Social feeds lit up instantly. A line this audacious wasn't just an insult, it was a cultural lightning strike. It pierced through the air of political decorum and demanded the country confront the blurred lines between family loyalty and democratic integrity. For some, it was vindication. For others, it was blasphemy, but no one could deny it. Jasmine had dared to say what millions whispered in private. And in that single sentence, she transformed the stage from a polite sparring match into an existential showdown between privilege and principle. The gasps hadn't yet settled when a restless energy rolled across the chamber, as if everyone sensed history bending in real time. This was more than a clapback. This was a challenge, a dare, a revelation, and it left even Ivanka Trump scrambling to find her footing. But before we understand why Jasmine's words cut so deep, we need to rewind. Asterisk the setting was a high-profile congressional hearing, the kind designed to project solemnity and control. Cameras lined the back wall, their red recording lights glowing like watchful eyes. The air carried that sterile weight unique to Washington, a performance space where every word was measured, every gesture rehearsed, and every silence carefully calculated. But beneath the surface, tension pulsed. Everyone knew this wasn't just another hearing. This was theater, political, personal, explosive. Ivanka Trump entered with the poise of someone who had been coached her entire life to play the part of authority. She moved with calm elegance, her voice polished, her gestures subtle, her gaze deliberate. To her supporters, she represented sophistication, the modern face of a legacy built by her father. To critics, she embodied the hypocrisy of privilege, disguised as merit. And on that day, Ivanka wasn't just there as a daughter, she was there as the shield of a dynasty. Tasked with protecting the Trump name from any blemish, she leaned into her role seamlessly. When questions arose about nepotism, it's about blurred lines between family ties and public trust, Ivanka responded with a practiced serenity. "I am here because I care about this country," she said, her words delivered like a press release rather than a confession. She framed her presence as duty, as sacrifice, as proof that the Trump family was united not just by blood, but by a supposed commitment to public service. It was the narrative she had rehearsed for years. She wore it like armor. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't buying the armor, wore the act. Sitting just a few feet away, Jasmine carried none of the silk-wrapped detachment. She radiated raw energy, the kind that didn't need polish because it carried truth. Her reputation preceded her: fiery cross-examinations, unapologetic stands, and a refusal to bow to titles or legacies. In her eyes, the hearing wasn't about protecting a family's image, it was about exposing the gap between the America Ivanka pretended to represent and the America people actually lived in. The contrast was magnetic. On one side, Ivanka, the embodiment of dynasty politics, presenting herself as untouchable, almost royal in posture. On the other, Jasmine, the product of grit, community, hard-earned credibility, unafraid to puncture the performance with reality, and the tension was building. Each time Ivanka deflected with elegance, Jasmine sharpened her focus. Each time Ivanka invoked the Trump name as legacy, Jasmine prepared to reveal it as liability. The stakes weren't just personal, they were national, because at its core, this wasn't simply a clash between two women. It was a collision of two Americas, one that still clung to the myth of inherited power, and another that demanded accountability, representation, and truth. The cameras caught every raised eyebrow, every tightening jawline, every subtle shift in posture. The crowd felt the pressure mounting. Everyone in the room sensed if the conversation was heading toward a breaking point. This wasn't going to remain polite sparring. It couldn't. There was too much on the line, too much history pressing down, too much truth begging to be spoken. And as Ivanka doubled down, presenting her family not as a dynasty, but as a blessing for the nation, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, her voice steady, her eyes locked. What happened next wouldn't just embarrass Ivanka, it would redefine how. America talks about power and family. Ivanka Trump was never just another child in a wealthy family. From the moment she entered the world, her life was framed by gold-plated doors, towering skyscrapers with her family's name etched in steel, and a father who thrived on spectacle. Her childhood wasn't one of anonymity or quiet discovery. It was a carefully constructed narrative of luxury and access. Where other children played on playgrounds, Ivanka's playgrounds were penthouse suites and private resorts. Where others dreamed of breaking into the world, she was born with the world already laid out at her feet. Growing up under Donald Trump's gaze meant living inside a brand. Every public appearance, every magazine spread, every perfectly lit photo was part of a greater performance. The Trump dynasty as untouchable, glamorous, destined to rule. And Ivanka was groomed to be the polished jewel of that empire. Boarding schools in elite zip codes, modeling gigs in glossy magazines, internships at the family company before most teenagers even considered summer jobs, all of it reinforced the same lesson. She was not like everyone else. She was above this. Insulation from reality shaped her worldview. To Ivanka, hardship was theoretical. Sacrifice was a word she could rehearse in speeches, not something she lived. Even when she branded herself as a self-made entrepreneur with her fashion lines and lifestyle empire, the scaffolding beneath her success was clear. A network of wealth, connections, and name recognition that no ordinary woman could ever replicate. It wasn't entrepreneurship. It was inheritance disguised as hustle. And yet, Ivanka sold herself as more than a daughter of privilege. She leaned into the language of empowerment. She published books about women who work, filled with glossy images of balance and ambition. She stood on international stages promoting herself as a feminist voice, a modern woman who wanted to elevate others. On paper, it looked inspiring. In practice, it rang hollow. Because while Ivanka preached empowerment, she stood by silently, or worse. In defense, while her father bulldozed women's rights, mocked survivors, and weaponized power against the vulnerable. The contradictions were glaring. She claimed to fight for women, yet excused the Access Hollywood tape with the quiet assurance that that's not who he really is. She sat at tables of global power, speaking softly about gender equality, while her father's administration rolled back protections for working mothers and limited access to health care. She projected compassion in curated Instagram posts of her children, while defending policies that separated immigrant families at the border. And when confronted, she didn't break stride. Her tone was always measured, always calm, always dressed in the neutrality of someone who could afford to float above outrage. To her, politics was not survival, it was branding. Every scandal was just another press cycle. Every accusation against her father was met with the same soft dismissal. He's misunderstood. He's misrepresented. He's different behind closed doors. This ability to rationalize, to excuse, to polish even the ugliest truths into something palatable, became her defining role. She was the filter. Donald Trump blustered, barked, and bullied. Ivanka stepped in to soothe, to reassure, to soften the blow. It was a deliberate performance. Father as strongman, daughter as diplomat. But underneath, it was all part of the same machinery dynasty, entitlement. Unchecked power passed from one generation to the next. Ivanka's arrogance wasn't loud. It wasn't crass or vulgar like her father's. It was subtler, cloaked in elegance. She believed that her poise made her untouchable, that her privilege shielded her from scrutiny. She could smile through accusations, brush aside contradictions, and glide past accountability. And in a way, it worked. For years, the media treated her as the reasonable Trump, the softer voice of moderation. Her designer dresses and calm tone distracted from the reality. She was enabling the very same corruption she pretended to rise above. The moments that revealed her insulation from reality were almost too many to count. When asked about struggling mothers, she spoke in platitudes about finding balance, as if nannies, chauffeurs, and private chefs were universal resources. When confronted about immigrants suffering under her father's policies, she pivoted to generic statements about compassion, without ever acknowledging her family's role in the suffering. She lived in a bubble, and she spoke as if everyone else did too. Too many. Ivanka became the perfect symbol of polished hypocrisy. She wanted credit for empowerment without paying the price of sacrifice. She wanted applause for diplomacy without challenging the corruption at its core. And she wanted admiration for independence while tethering every success. Every platform, every spotlight back to the Trump name, her defenders saw sophistication. Her critics saw complicity. But both sides agreed on one thing. Ivanka Trump was never just Ivanka. She was the daughter of Donald Trump, shaped by him, elevated by him, and, in the eyes of the world, inseparable from him. And it was precisely that inseparability, the blurred line between identity and inheritance, that Jasmine Crockett would later weaponize. Because when Jasmine delivered her cutting line, she wasn't just questioning Ivanka's words in that chamber. She was tearing into the very foundation of her persona. Ivanka had spent decades polishing her shield of privilege, convincing the world that she was untouchable. But in that one moment, Jasmine exposed the truth. Shields can crack. And it was precisely this shield of privilege that Jasmine was about to shatter. Asterisk. Jasmine Crockett's story didn't begin in penthouses or private schools. It began in the corners of America that too often go unseen, where hard work is a necessity, not a slogan. She was raised in a working-class family, surrounded by people who measured success not in luxury or fame, but in survival and dignity. For Jasmine, the world didn't hand out favors. It handed out obstacles, and she learned early that the only way forward was through grit. Unlike Ivanka, Jasmine's childhood wasn't a stage 4 branding. It was a lesson in resilience. She saw the realities of families living paycheck to paycheck, the sacrifices parents made to keep food on the table, the quiet strength of communities that endured even when systems failed them. These were not abstract concepts. They were lived truths, and they shaped the core of who she became. Her path to law was not paved by legacy, but carved through determination. In classrooms where she was often underestimated, Jasmine refused to shrink. She learned to argue not for the sake of argument, but to defend her place, her voice, her right to be heard. While Ivanka's life was curated for appearances, Jasmine's life was forged in resistance. Every barrier she faced became training for the battle she would later wage in the public eye. When Jasmine stepped into law school, she wasn't carrying a family brand. She was carrying the weight of her community. She studied not just to succeed, but to equip herself with the tools to fight. Every case she read, every principle she absorbed, was grounded in a single conviction. Justice should belong to everyone. It's not just those who could afford it. Her career reflected that conviction. Jasmine didn't chase corporate law or lucrative partnerships. She became a defender of the voiceless. She stood beside clients who had been ignored, dismissed, or written off by the system. She fought for fairness in courtrooms where the odds were stacked, often against those who looked like her, lived like her, or came from the same overlooked corners of society. Her reputation grew not as someone who smoothed edges or played it safe, but as someone unafraid to confront power head-on. That fire made her more than just a lawyer. It made her an advocate, a fighter, and eventually, a leader. When Jasmine entered politics, She carried with her the scars and victories of those courtroom battles. She wasn't polished into diplomacy. She was sharpened into honesty. And that authenticity resonated. People saw in her someone who had walked through the same storms they had. Someone who refused to bow to privilege. Someone who embodied dignity, not as performance, but as lived reality. Her rise was never effortless. She faced dismissals, doubters, and attacks from those who couldn't stand the thought of a woman like her speaking truth without apology. Yet each challenge only deepened her resolve. For Jasmine, struggle wasn't a setback, it was preparation. And that's where her contrast with Ivanka Trump becomes electric. Ivanka's story is one of insulation, of being shielded from hardship. Jasmine's story is one of collision with hardship, of turning adversity into fuel. Ivanka presented herself as empowered while benefiting from a patriarch's empire. Jasmine embodied empowerment by standing against those same patriarchal systems in every way. Jasmine represented the America Ivanka could never understand. The America where titles are earned, not inherited. Where respect is fought for, not gifted. Where dignity isn't a brand, but a survival mechanism. And it was this authenticity that gave Jasmine her power in that chamber. She didn't arrive at that, hearing as a product of legacy. She arrived as a product of struggle, of service, of grit. The fire in her voice came from years of defending those without a microphone. The precision of her words came from countless hours dissecting arguments in courtrooms where silence could mean defeat. The confidence in her posture came not from luxury, but from the knowledge that she had already endured worse and overcome it. This wasn't just a clash between two women. It was a clash between two life stories. One polished in privilege, the other forged in fire. One protected by dynasty, the other propelled by dignity. And that's why the moment mattered. Because Jasmine didn't just have a line ready, she had a lifetime of truth to back it up. So when the insult came, Jasmine had a lifetime of truth at her back, and she wasn't afraid to use it. Asterisk, the room pulsed with an uneasy energy. After the insult, is Trump your father or your husband? The air had already grown heavy with discomfort. But instead of backing down, Ivanka leaned forward, her practiced smile sharpening into a blade. This was her moment to reassert dominance. To remind the world that her last name carried weight beyond the walls of that chamber. Her voice was smooth, deliberate, polished, like the boardroom she had spent her life in. Congresswoman Crockett, she began, tilting her head with a touch of faux sympathy. I think sometimes passion can cloud judgment. We're not here to score points. We're here to talk policy. Perhaps if you focused less on dramatics and more on substance, you'd be taken more seriously in these rooms. A ripple of murmurs coursed through the audience. Some leaned back, smirking at Ivanka's cutting remark, while others exchanged wide-eyed glances, sensing the condescension dripping from every word. Ivanka wasn't just defending her family name, she was attempting to put Jasmine back in her place. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She sat upright, her eyes locked onto Ivanka's with an unshakable steadiness. Her silence stretched for a beat too long, forcing everyone in the room to hold their breath. When she finally spoke, her tone was calm, but beneath it simmered a fire that no dynasty could extinguish. Taken seriously? Jasmine said, her voice low, deliberate. Where I come from, being taken seriously doesn't come from a last name. It comes from fighting for people who don't have one. The crowd reacted instantly, gasps, scattered applause, and even a few shouted affirmations from the back rows. Ivanka's jaw tightened. She wasn't used to being challenged so directly, especially not in a way that undercut the very foundation of her privilege. Asterisk still. Ivanka pressed on, doubling down with the smooth arrogance of someone who had rehearsed these sparring matches her entire life. You see, that's the difference between us. I was raised to lead, to take responsibility, to understand the weight of legacy. You, on the other hand, seem to confuse confrontation with leadership. The words hung in the air like perfume, sweet to her supporters but suffocating to those who saw through the act. Cameras flashed. Phones buzzed with live tweets. The divide in the room was no longer just about two women. It was about two Americas colliding in real time. Jasmine leaned forward now, her expression steady but fierce. Legacy. She repeated, almost as if tasting the word. Legacy is what you leave behind for the people who come after you. What you're talking about is entitlement. There's a difference. Asterisk, the audience erupted again, louder this time. Even the moderators, struggling to keep order, could feel the tide shifting. What started as a battle of polished rhetoric versus raw conviction had transformed into something larger, a symbolic confrontation between inherited power and earned respect. Asterisk. Ivanka's smile faltered for the first time. She tried to recover with a dismissive wave of her hand, as though brushing away Jasmine's point like dust on marble. Congresswoman, this kind of rhetoric might play well for cameras, but we both know it doesn't solve anything. You can throw around words like entitlement, but at the end of the day, leadership requires composure, not theatrics. Asterisk, and there it was again, the polished condescension, wrapped in civility, but aimed like a dagger. Ivanka wasn't debating anymore. She was trying to reduce Jasmine to a caricature, a loud disruptor who lacked sophistication. Asterisk, the room fell into a charged silence, waiting for Jasmine's response. Every camera lens, every phone, every eye in the room locked on her. And then, with her gaze fixed squarely on Ivanka, she began to speak, slowly, clearly. With a precision that cut sharper than any insult, it was the line that would freeze the entire room. Asterisk. The chamber had already been tense, but now the silence felt weaponized. Jasmine leaned back in her chair for a brief second, steadying herself, then leaned forward with deliberate calm. Her eyes locked onto Ivanka's with the kind of piercing intensity that stripped away the cameras. The audience, the grandeur of the moment, it was just two women, face to face. And then with a pause that seemed to stretch into eternity, Jasmine's lips curled into the faintest smirk. The kind of smirk that said, "You walked right into this." She spoke slowly, enunciating each word as if carving them into stone. "Is Trump your father or your husband?" The words detonated like a thunderclap. Gasps filled the chamber. Audible, unfiltered human gasps, the kind that ripple when people know they've just witnessed history. A few nervous laughs escaped, the kind people let out when they can't quite process the audacity of what they've just heard. Camera flashes lit up like lightning, capturing the exact moment Jasmine's words hit their target. Ivanka froze. Her perfectly rehearsed composure, years of media training, public polish, cultivated grace cracked in an instant. For a beat, she didn't blink. She didn't breathe. She just sat there, eyes wide, lips parted, as though she had been struck across the face in front of the entire nation. The silence after the line was deafening. Not the silence of apathy, but the silence of a room stunned into immobility. Even the moderators, usually quick to interject and regain control, seemed momentarily paralyzed. And then, as if the internet itself had materialized inside the chamber, the validation arrived in real time. Phones buzzed. People in the audience were already whispering about Twitter, already predicting TikTok edits. Hashtags began forming like sparks in dry grass. Hashtag father or husband. Hashtag Crockett clapback. Hashtag Ivanka checkmate. Within minutes, outside the chamber, clips of Jasmine's delivery were being looped, slowed down, remixed with dramatic music. Users on TikTok overlaid it with explosions, with laugh tracks. The captions like, "When privilege meets reality." Back inside the room, the air shifted. You could feel it. The crowd was no longer split. The murmurs weren't about policy anymore. They were about spectacle, about humiliation, about witnessing someone stand up to dynasty with nothing but wit and truth. Ivanka finally blinked. She adjusted the cuff of her sleeve, an unconscious tell that her control was slipping. Her voice, usually smooth and commanding, came out thinner now, a fraction too high-pitched. That's absurd," she stammered, forcing a laugh that didn't land. "Congresswoman, I don't think this is a serious line of discussion. We're here to address real issues. It's not indulge in tabloid-level remarks." It was a shaky attempt to recover, but the damage was already done. The chamber wasn't listening to her defense. They were replaying Jasmine's line in their heads, each repetition hitting harder than the last. Jasmine didn't let the silence linger this time. She leaned in, her voice steady, her tone sharp but controlled. "You want to talk about Sirius?" she said, locking eyes with Ivanka again. Sirius is a president putting his own children in positions of power they didn't earn. Sirius is using family ties as a shield from accountability. Sirius is parading legacy as if it's leadership. Her words sliced clean, leaving no room for rebuttal. Each point struck at Ivanka's carefully constructed image: the businesswoman, the advisor, the independent feminist brand. Jasmine was dismantling it in real time, brick by brick, exposing the foundation for what it truly was: nepotism, privilege, and hypocrisy. The crowd responded with energy that couldn't be contained. Applause broke out in pockets, followed by louder cheers, until the moderators were forced to pound the gavel to restore order. But even as they tried to settle the room, it was clear the tide had turned. Ivanka's mask slipped further. Her smile was stretched too tight now, her jaw clenched just a fraction too hard. Her cheeks flushed, betraying the humiliation she tried to mask with poise. She reached for her notes, flipping through them as if answers might magically appear in the margins. But there was nothing written on those pristine pages that could undo the sting of Jasmine's words, and Jasmine wasn't finished. "You stand here," Jasmine continued, her voice rising with conviction, trying to tell me about composure, about legacy, about leadership. But leadership isn't inherited, Ms. Trump. Leadership is earned. And no amount of polished rhetoric can change that truth. The chamber erupted again, applause. Cheers, the unmistakable sound of a crowd choosing sides. Phones were lifted higher now, recording not just Jasmine's words, but Ivanka's unraveling. For the first time in her carefully curated public life, Ivanka Trump looked small. Her shoulders hunched slightly inward, her gaze dropped for just a second too long. It was subtle, but undeniable, a sign of defeat. Meanwhile, Jasmine radiated strength. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't theatrics. She was steady, commanding, grounded in a lifetime of truth. Every word, every gesture carried the weight of lived experience, the exact contrast to Ivanka's insulated privilege. This was the turning point. Everyone in the room knew it. The dynamic had shifted. Jasmine wasn't just holding her own, she had seized control of the entire narrative, and beyond those walls. The world was already reacting. Twitter feeds lit up with clips captioned, "The line that ended Ivanka." TikTok users synced Jasmine's smirk to trending audio. Memes multiplied Ivanka's stunned face, photoshopped into movie posters. Comic strips, viral gifs. #father or husband wasn't just trending. It was dominating. Late-night comedians were already drafting their punchlines. Political pundits were reframing the debate, no longer about policy points, but about a cultural shift, the moment privilege was called out and couldn't answer back. Inside the chamber, Ivanka's attempt at composure had collapsed into silence. Her pen tapped nervously against her notes, her breathing shallow, her eyes darting as though searching for an escape. And Jasmine? She simply sat back, letting the weight of her words linger, letting the crowd's reaction fill the room. She had done what few dared to do. Punctured the aura of untouchability surrounding a dynasty. The mic drop wasn't just a line. It was a cultural earthquake, and from this moment on, nothing about Ivanka Trump, her image, her authority, her carefully polished brand would ever look the same again. Asterisk. The moment Jasmine's words landed, "Is Trump your father or your husband?" they didn't just echo through the hearing room. They detonated across the nation. By the time the gavel struck to restore order, the internet had already decided this was bigger than politics. This was cultural theater, and Jasmine Crockett had just delivered the line of a generation. Twitter lit up first. Within minutes, #father or husband surged to the top of trending lists. Joined quickly by #Crockett clapback and #IVANKA checkmate. Users didn't just share the clip, they remixed it. Some slowed it down with dramatic violins swelling in the background. Others cut it into boxing highlight reels, Jasmine landing the knockout punch. Memes flooded timelines. Ivanka's frozen expression pasted onto statues,
Oh.
onto stock photos of malfunctioning robots, onto collapsing Jenga towers. The virality was relentless. On TikTok, creators churned out edits by the thousands. One synced Jasmine smirked to the opening beat of Beyoncé's Run the World Girls. Another overlaid her delivery with a countdown timer, pausing at the word husband before the screen exploded into fireworks. The most popular clip racked up millions of views in hours, Jasmine staring Ivanka down, subtitles blazing, "When Privilege Meets Reality." Asterisk by evening, late-night talk shows had their monologues ready. Stephen Colbert quipped. Ivanka went in with couture confidence and left looking like she needed a witness protection program. Trevor Noah played the clip twice, then deadpanned. That wasn't a clapback, that was a clap funeral. Even Jimmy Fallon, often soft on politics, couldn't resist. Usually Ivanka is the one selling products, but last night she got sold out. The studio audiences roared. Laughter, reinforcing the narrative that Jasmine had flipped the script and Ivanka had no answer. Asterisk. Public perception crystallized quickly. Jasmine was being hailed not just as a sharp debater, but as a truth teller, unafraid to puncture privilege. On progressive blogs and immigrant community forums, her words became a rallying cry. Proof that arrogance could be shattered by courage. For young women of color, the clip was more than entertainment, it was validation. A reminder that sharp wit, delivered at the right moment, could humble even the most insulated elites. Asterisk, Ivanka, meanwhile, became the butt of jokes. The polished sheen she had worked years to maintain cracked under the spotlight. Op-eds described her as unmasked, out of touch, the dynasty princess dethroned by a single question. Even some conservative commentators, normally quick to defend the Trumps, sidestepped the humiliation rather than attempt to spin it. One Fox panelist muttered, "It was not her best moment," before moving quickly to another topic. Rivals within her own party, always eager to chip at the Trump brand, gleefully retweeted the clip with thinly veiled delight. Politically, the ripple effect was immediate. Progressive allies celebrated Jasmine as fearless. "This is what standing up to power looks like," tweeted one senator. Others called the exchange a turning point in how Democrats could confront the Trump dynasty, not with deference, but with unapologetic truth. Cable news devoted entire segments to analyzing Jasmine's delivery, Ivanka's reaction, and what it all symbolized about gender, power, and politics in America. But it wasn't just a US phenomenon. International press outlets picked it up, running headlines that read like tabloid drama. The Guardian splashed Crockett's razor, the line that cut Ivanka Trump down to size. Le Monde framed it as American aristocracy meets its challenger. In India, news anchors replayed the clip with gleeful commentary about dynasties finally facing accountability. Even in countries where American politics usually garnered little more than passing interest, the exchange became clickbait gold, a moment of raw drama transcending borders. For Ivanka, the humiliation grew heavier with each news cycle. Where once her image was that of calm elegance, now the meme of her frozen face circulated as shorthand for privilege confronted. The Trump brand, usually adept at spinning ridicule into rallying cries, found little footing. No slogan, no soundbite could erase the sting of Jasmine's question. And for Jasmine, the momentum only grew. She wasn't just the congresswoman from Texas anymore. She was a cultural force. People spoke of her in the same breath as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Stacey Abrams, unapologetic women rewriting the rules of political combat. Interviews flooded in. Invitations to speak skyrocketed. Her name was now shorthand for what it meant to clap back with precision and power. But here's the thing. Jasmine didn't let the story end with humiliation. She didn't just bask in the viral fame. She understood something deeper, that spectacle without purpose fades. So instead of letting the moment be just a meme, she pivoted. She reframed the conversation, using her platform to expose the dangers of dynasty politics, to highlight how privilege shields accountability, to remind America why she entered the fight in the first place. The mic drop had created the audience. But what Jasmine did next would turn that audience into a movement, because she wasn't done. She was about to transform a viral insult into a lesson. America couldn't ignore asterisk. When the storm of laughter and gasps finally settled, Jasmine did something remarkable. She didn't simply bask in the glow of a perfectly timed takedown. She pivoted, turning the viral moment into something larger, something that stretched beyond Ivanka Trump. Beyond the chamber, beyond the fleeting thrill of humiliation, she leaned into the microphone. Her tone steady, but carrying the weight of conviction. "Let's be clear," she said, her gaze still fixed on Ivanka, but her words aimed at America. "This isn't about you. This is about us. About a country that has convinced itself power should be passed down like a family heirloom, instead of earned by serving people who actually need it." The room quieted. Even those who had cheered the jab now leaned in, realizing Jasmine wasn't content with a meme. She was delivering a message. Dynasty politics, she continued, has taught us that a famous last name can be treated like a resume. That a title, or a father's fortune, can be confused with leadership. But leadership isn't inherited. It's earned through sweat, through sacrifice, through standing up for people who have no microphone, no cameras, no privilege to protect them. Every word carried contrast. Ivanka's polished image of entitlement versus Jasmine's raw authenticity. The daughter of luxury seated beside the daughter of working-class grit. Privilege against service. Arrogance against dignity. And in that contrast, the audience saw a mirror of America itself, divided between those clinging to dynasties and those demanding democracy live up to its promise. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The calm ferocity in her tone made every syllable strike harder. This moment, it's not about embarrassing someone. I don't believe in cruelty for its own sake. This is about truth. And sometimes, truth sounds like humiliation only because it punctures the bubble of power. The cameras zoomed in, capturing her steady composure. Later, those clips would replay endlessly on news broadcasts, her words echoing across living rooms, classrooms, and community halls. Teachers would cite it in civics lessons. Parents would play it for their kids as proof that arrogance can be challenged without losing dignity. She closed with a line that rippled across the chamber like a hymn. America doesn't need another dynasty. It needs leaders who remember who they're here to serve. Dignity will outlast privilege. Service will outlast entitlement. And truth will always outlast arrogance. There was silence at first. The kind of silence that feels like the air itself is holding its breath. Then came the applause. It wasn't the wild eruption that followed her original jab. This was deeper, more resonant. People stood to their feet, clapping not just for a clapback, for a principle. And that's why this story didn't end the way viral moments usually do. It didn't fade into the endless churn of internet noise. It stayed, because Jasmine reframed it from spectacle to substance. From a viral takedown to a moral reckoning. It was never just about Ivanka Trump. It was about America's addiction to dynasty politics. The idea that power should be preserved for the few rather than earned by the many. Jasmine had taken a moment of sharp humiliation and turned it into a universal truth. Worth is not inherited. It is proven day by day in service to others, and that's why. Even now, the clip still circulates, the words still resonate, the lesson still matters. Because in that room, on that day, one woman reminded a country that dignity, when spoken with clarity and courage, can silence even the loudest echo of privilege. And that's why this story still resonates far beyond that room. Asterisk, is Trump your father or husband? The question still reverberates long after the chamber fell silent. At first, it seemed like a sharp jab, a single insult hurled across a tense debate. But it was more than that. It was a spotlight. A spotlight on how entitlement masks itself as leadership, how dynasty politics tries to dress itself as democracy. Jasmine Crockett's words didn't just strip away one woman's arrogance. They exposed an entire system built on inheritance rather than service. And that's why this moment matters. Because dignity will always outlast dynasty. Truth will always outshine arrogance. And courage, spoken at the right time, has the power to silence privilege, no matter how polished. No matter how untouchable it pretends to be. That's the lesson carried beyond the chamber. Beyond the headlines, beyond the memes. It wasn't about humiliation for its own sake. It was about reminding America of a truth too often forgotten. Real worth isn't passed down. It's earned, proven, and lived out in service to others. So if you believe courage must always speak louder than privilege, share this story. Let it ripple through your circles, your feeds, your communities. And if you want more moments where truth wins and arrogance falls, subscribe now. Be part of this growing movement that refuses to be silenced. The final image is burned into memory. Jasmine walking out steady. Shoulders squared, head high, not triumphant but grounded. As though she carried with her every voice she had spoken for. And Ivanka, left in silence, the weight of privilege suddenly exposed for what it was. One walked out with dignity. The other sat in the ruins of arrogance, and America will remember which mattered more.